Hey, and welcome back to this tutorial series where I'll be showing you how I've done the different sound effects for this car game called Extreme Drift. So today I'll be running through the different sound effects and components that go towards creating the actual car. This will contain all of the different properties of the car, such as the revs, the tyres, the off-road surfaces, for example. So without further ado, let's get right into it. So one of the first things that I think about when I think of a real life car on a road is that when you hear it going past, the main thing that you hear is the actual engine of the car. So here I've managed to source 7 different sound effects from either online or I've recorded them myself of cars. So one thing that I had to look for when creating this was a constant rev of a car, because obviously if the audio file itself is going up and down in pitch, I won't be able to automate the pitch later on, and it would just sound really messy and really confusing actually in the game. I did actually struggle to find audio files online of cars revving at a constant speed. So obviously in the real world, if I had obviously a team behind me or whatever, I would actually go out and source the sounds themselves from real life cars. A bit like I've seen Forza Horizon do. They will actually go and find the real life cars and record different levels of revs. Obviously, I don't have that budget or that team behind me to do that, unfortunately. But with what I've got, I believe I did a good job. So if I go through all these, as you'll notice, all of the different revs are in a switch container. This game actually uses 12 different cars. So I've been able to create 12 different car sound effects using only 7 audio files, which is pretty cool. So obviously car 1 sounds like this, which sounds a lot different from car 2, and so on and so forth. So as you'll notice, all of these are looped as well, so obviously we've been able to sort of create a perfect loop by sort of duplicating the original audio and reversing it. So then obviously it just sort of like plays the sound forward, then it plays it back, then it plays it forward. So obviously it just creates a nice fluent loop. So the main thing that happens when the car is revving more is that its pitch goes up. Because obviously it's got more revs a minute, so the actual pitch, the frequency that the engine is giving off will actually start to increase. So that is the main parameter that's being altered here. As you see, I've got a RTPC here, a parameter control called car rev. So in the actual game, the developer has got this value going from 0 to 3. So just experimenting with different pitches and that, I found that obviously using this value, it will help to alter the pitch of the current rev that's playing. So I found that here is basically the point of where the gear changes happen. So obviously it will start at 0 as the car obviously starts. Then it will go up and up and up. And it's not until it reaches around this point that it actually changes gear. And goes down to around where this point is. So obviously I want the actual pitch between these 2 points to be quite dramatic, as you would expect. So obviously then, when it does change gear, there's a very audible difference of it going up in revs, and it sounds a little bit more exciting rather than just a very slight pitch increase. And then obviously above this value, there's not many times that the user would go above it, so obviously then I've used more of a sort of flatter curve because revs won't really go above this value, only in very extreme cases. So that's used on all different cars, using different levels. Obviously there was a lot of experimenting that went on in this. So if I actually look at the switch group, obviously then I've linked up the sound effects to the correct switch. Obviously car 1 with car 1, car 2 with car 2, car 3 with car 3. But then I've done like a little bit of experimenting as well. So obviously like here car 5, that actually plays both the revs of car 5 and car 4 at the same time. Again, they sound completely different, but together they create a sort of new engine sound. And then another different one is car 8, which is layering car 4 and the police siren, because that is a police car in the game. So that's mainly how I did the revs of this car. The next thing that I think about when I think of a car on a road is obviously when the revs are going up, it's not just floating in the air, it is on a certain surface. So obviously when you think of a car on a tarmac road compared to on a grass track, obviously the tarmac road will sound a little bit more muffled and a bit more gritty, whereas on a grass surface it'd be a lot more sludgy over gravel. So obviously I needed to create something that sort of give this effect off. So first of all I set up this little state group here, deciding whether the car was on or off road, which is controlled in Unity. So obviously when it's on the road, we have this tire gravel, which is like basically the on-road sound. So obviously when he's actually set to on-road, the volume is a little bit more higher. It's a little bit more muffled than when it's off-road, obviously. But then when it's off-road, obviously, just like turn it down a little bit along with the actual layer that you will see later. So obviously whilst that's playing, on the road it sounds like that. And off-road it sounds like, so as you can tell, like all the low frequencies are sort of taken out of it because you're not on the hard surface anymore, you'll be on a more softer surface. Whereas these off-road surfaces, when you go into them, when it's on the road, they are set to minus 108, which is pretty much inaudible. But obviously, so then if I set that to road and play it, you won't hear anything. And then if I set the off-road surface to grass, for example, and then go back to off-road, you'll start to hear the grass now. Which is obviously pretty cool because then I can switch between the different road surfaces. So for example, in racetrack 1, that's more of a grass off-road surface, whereas obviously 3 is surrounded by the desert, so obviously you want a different sound for the sand. Let me just demonstrate that here. Obviously, as you can hear, that sounds a lot more sand-like. Obviously, if that was playing on the sand, wouldn't quite sound right, would it? Whereas that does sound like a tyre being scraped on sand. Then obviously we've got snow as well, which is actually a layer of the sand, but it is actually a few semitones lower. But yeah, that was mainly how I did the road surfaces, and again I think this works quite well because the user wants an audio representation of when they have gone off-road. So a good example I can give this is obviously if they're playing and their attention goes somewhere else to look at the phone or what have you, and all of a sudden they start hearing the off-road surface, they will automatically know that their car has gone off-road. And again, this just adds like a nice little layer, because without it there it would sound very, very odd, obviously. So then alongside that, you've got little parameters such as like the gear changes, which are just like different ones in this random container that will just play a random one every time the gear goes up or down. You got like a little collision, which obviously when the car impacts into something you hear that. Then you've got a nitrous as well, which again is another parameter control. This was actually recorded with me spraying a deodorant bottle, as you'll see in this video here. So this audio effect is actually controlled by another parameter control, which again is in Unity that the developer had already put in there. So obviously this goes up, the volume gets louder along with the pitch. So just to also give a little bit more focus to that, I have put this into a separate audio buzz to the Revs, which is actually a ducker buzz. So basically, when the nitrous and the gear changes come in, it actually attenuates the volume of the revs from the car, just to bring a little bit more focus to it. So basically, like, the user knows that something's happened. So yeah, as I say, it just brings a lot of focus to them certain sound effects. And then I'd say the last thing here to show is actually the drifts. So the actual drift detection in the game was a bit iffy at times. So if I actually fired a sound effect, it would fire it off at the wrong time, or it would like fire 5 different drifts at the same time, which wasn't ideal at all. So obviously now if I go onto the tire screeches, that almost constantly plays in the background because it gets used a lot when the user's braking or drifting. There's not much times where they aren't drifting, so I thought this would be okay for now. So I've literally just put it on a state group, which obviously determines if it is or it isn't drifting. So if it isn't drifting, it's inaudible, you can't hear anything. But then if it is drifting, obviously it slowly fades up at a random point. So if I look at the state groups here, so what's happening is, you can imagine, when it isn't drifting, the volume goes to the minimum. But also the pitch goes up. So what you'll notice is that when it goes from the is drift state to the isn't drift, there's a slight little tail to the audio that goes just up a little bit in pitch, which I think's nice, because when you hear cars do that in real life, they sort of do that when the car either comes to a stop or it's finished drifting, or the tail kicks back onto the road. The actual drift does go up in pitch. And because the actual and because this doesn't actually happen instantaneously, it happens over 0.3 seconds, as you can hear in the game syncs. He just adds that little bit to the end of it to make it sound a little bit more real. That was mainly it, to be honest, for the car itself. The only interesting event that I can think of off the top of my head is the collision, because I've used a new event parameter that I haven't used before called Seek. So what this does is, I've set a random amount from 0% to 50%, and that chooses a random place to actually start the collision sound effect. So when I play this, it's the exact same audio, but you'll hear now some collisions are a lot longer than other ones. And then obviously I have altered like the pitch a little bit on the audio itself. But again, it's about creating the diversity of these sound effects, because if you fired off the exact same audio effect every single time, it becomes very monotonous and very boring in the game. So, as I say, it just adds that little bit of realism really to it. So just before I show what I've done in Unity itself, I'll just go through the certain effects as well that I've got on here. So for example, on the car, we've just got a little EQ that is obviously like boosting the low end a bit to obviously make it a little bit more boomy, a little bit more bassy, which works quite well as bring out the highs a little bit, because compared to the music, the car sounded really muffled, whereas really, as I say, you want most of the attention for a car game of all sorts to be directed straight to the car. There is a bit of distortion going on here, mainly controlled by, again, the car rev parameter control, which just in turn actually adds a tiny little bit of distortion to the top end. And you can sort of hear when it gets really high to the point of where the listener won't go, you can really start hearing that distortion. But down here, just adds that nice little crunch to the top of the car rev, which I quite liked, but it's only a real subtle effect. I thought it'd be nice to include though. I've added a tiny little reverb with a decay of like 0.2 seconds, and this just helped with the rev of the car going from one pitch to another. It just made it a little bit more smoother going up, if you know what I mean, so it didn't sound janky when it was going up by value. But I just really like this. It added a little bit of space to the car and what have you. Then just finishing it off with a tiny bit of compression just to regulate like the volume of the car. So obviously then it wasn't too loud for the listener. Then if there was a point where it did get too loud, it would just reduce it. I suppose the last thing that I forgot to show as well is the positioning of the car. Because obviously I thought this would be important to add, because obviously you want the car sounds to be emitting from the car in the game. So obviously here on all of the car sound effects, I've put this position and orientation on with like the car attenuation. I just didn't name it here. So obviously what this does then, it actually emits the sound effect from the actual game object. And then with the main camera being the main listener for this game, it'll work out how much it needs to actually attenuate the sound effects by, as well as working out where the pan should be. So when the car is more in the right side of the screen, it will actually pan the sound effects more to the right side. As I'll show you in the quick demo, when I change the camera, you'll start to hear it more then. But it makes the actual sound like they're coming from the car and not weirdly just in your ears, just floating about, if that makes sense. It just creates that realism to the game. So moving swiftly on to Unity, I'm afraid I've not got that much to really show here, because the actual developer of the game created this whole vehicle control script, which, to be honest, they'd already put a lot of the parameters, what I was trying to seek, in there. So obviously down here in the little car sound class, I've sort of linked up all of my different RTPCs, me different events, as well, like the switch groups. And this script, I won't show you much because a lot of it is to do with the game and not the audio. But basically I've got my sounds here, which obviously as you've just seen there. So all I've done is I've gone through here and using like trial and error and like just reading the script in general. I've found like the correct points to fire off the events to change the parameter controls, for example. But that's mainly what I did here. Then as you can see, each car, I can select a different car type using the switch groups, and that's what makes them sound a little bit different to one another. So really all I've got to do now is actually show you a working demo of this. So if I select the vehicle and select, say track 1, where the grass is and that. Let me just turn the radio off. So you'll start to hear that audio coming from the car already. So already you've got quite a bit going on with the drifts and everything happening. But you're starting to hear, just as the car is drifting around, you can hear it sort of panning between left and right, which is nice. So you can start hearing it going into the grass now I've gone off-road. Then now you can hear it going back onto the tarmac, which is quite nice. Now if I try a nitrous when I press the shift. So you hear that it just ducks that, it does actually duck the car rev quite a little bit. And I say that's quite good because then when the nitrous comes in, it just brings the focus to that nitrous. And obviously it brings more focus as it gets near to the empty part of it. Which obviously then the user sort of anticipates the nitrous being empty without looking at it. But obviously their attention's more focused on the car in that at the minute. So the last thing I've got to show you now is when I change the camera. So obviously like now when it's at the side of the car, you can really hear it, you know what I mean, because it's just in that right side of your ear. Put it onto the bonnet, the car will actually get a little bit louder because you're right on top of the game object. Then this is my favourite. Using the cinematic cam, you can really tell the positioning of the car getting louder and quieter, and also like the pan of where the car is in relation to this camera. Obviously you just can't see where you're going on this part. And as well, you can sort of just tell that real low end rumble as well as the car's going along. But that is pretty much it to show you, to be honest, with the cars. As I say, I'm not fully happy with the sound of the cars at the end of this, because as I say, I'd prefer to go out and actually source the material myself, or obviously have a team that go out and source the actual car audio themselves. But from what I had to work with, I was quite happy, seeing though some of these were either gotten from online, or I recorded it like my own car, for example, by myself. But I was just happy with what I had, basically. So if I have missed anything, please let me know down in the comments. But yeah, I hope to see you all in the next episode, where I'll be going more in depth on the music system. So I've created sort of like a radio like Forza Horizon radio game, even games like Burnout Paradise. But that'll be a lot of fun, and I'm really excited to showcase that. So I'll see you all in the next episode. See ya.